everyone. I'd like to welcome you to our third day of our wonderful conference on why it matters. My name is Amy Barnett. I'm the Program Director for Global Events and Hosting for the Office for Global Engagement on campus here at UVU. And I would like to officially welcome you to this thematic session on the Sustainable Development Goal number 10, which is reduced inequalities within and among communities. Countries, sorry, I can't use glasses to read. Today, as a moderator for the panel, we have Dr. Susana Mosquera, Vice Dean of Research and Professor of Law at the University of Piura in Peru. The panelists include Ms. Samantha Butterworth, Director of Product Management, the Welfare and Self-Reliance Services of the Church of Jesus Christ of Latter-day Saints, the Honorable José Borjón, who is the Cónsul General of Mexico, and the Reverend Marian Edmons-Allen, Executive Director of Parity in New York. So now I'll turn the time over to our moderator, Dr. Mosquera. Sorry. Thank you.
Thank you, Amy, for the wonderful presentation, and thank you, everybody, for attending this panel. I'm very pleased to be here, as well, Baldomero knows, and all the other that is attending the conference. This is a huge event. It's a really important one. First time we will be talking about the SDGs from an academic point of view. And this one is the SDG 10. I'm really aware that all the SDGs are really important, and theoretically all of them belong to a huge concept of development and sustainability. And SDG 17 must be the key word to open all the others. But I think that SDG 10, it plays a very interesting place in the middle of the panel of the 17 SDGs. And I used to describe it as the invisible one. Sometimes we are very aware that there exist inequalities in society. We know it. But we try to approach inequalities just describing it as an unfairness situation. And we think that when we describe the law in a fair way, everybody is equal before the law, that we just do not. Okay, the law already established that everybody is equal, so from now on, everybody will be equal. But this is not the case. Law is a tricky concept. And I would like to just make you think about the huge investment that countries in the North made to focus on pandemic problem. COVID-19 was a real problem globally, but you have to compare how many millions to invest. Countries, developed countries, to focus on scientific approach, economic approach to solve the COVID pandemic consequences. And then you have to compare how many, how few, how little countries in the South have done in the same topic. So life is a race. Normally we think it's a long distance race and we have to live a very grateful life, but the truth is that life is a cross-country race. And in this cross-country, we have to find very difficult obstacles. And not everybody faces the same ones. For some of us, race is in a plane, in a very beautiful environment. And for many other people in the world, race is a terrible, stressful activity because they have to face many, many inequalities, many differences, and that is a real problem. Rawls is a philosopher. He is playing justice, and then from the 70s, his theory on justice have evolved and have influenced many schools of law. And I'm not going to explain law now because will be very stressful for everybody. But Rawls used a concept named the veil of ignorance. You will create a real fair society when you apply the veil of ignorance to everybody. You will agree to be placed in every position of the pyramid of the society, even if you are rich or if you are poor, because you know that society will take care of you. If you are not able to create a society in this way, that won't be a fair society. And fairness is the first step to justice. Without fairness, we are not in a justice society, and inequalities will grow and grow up as we are watching nowadays. The fact is that I named the SDG 10 as the invisible one because many people is not aware of the inequalities, mainly for minorities, vulnerability groups, but also income inequalities are really huge nowadays. I explained about the pandemic comes, but you also have to consider that for the latest 30 years, it's not a very distance, it's not so many time, but for the latest 30 years, salary inequality was
Concept note and recent UN reports on progress against SDG 10. Drove to the store to get Oreos to help improve the emotional state of the person doing their homework. Project managed the submission of many ninth grade homework assignments before the term ends today. Kept a commitment to attend a choir practice, put some kids to bed, and waited for others to come home and tell me all about their night at the football game, and finally sat down to put the finishing touches on my preparation for today. All of our journeys are a little bit different, but what I wanted to do and why I wanted to be transparent about my own personal experience is because it is so critical to understand that we are whole people. We don't live our lives compartmentalized. So when we think about inequality, it's not just about employment or education or food security, the way we like to think about solving some of these global challenges. It's the entire messy symphony of people's lives. And so if you think perhaps for a recently arrived immigrant who also has an important meeting tomorrow. She wants to prepare for an important interview. She wants to be able to answer all the hard questions in the right way, have all her paperwork together. And as she prepares for that today, maybe she bumps into a lack of access to the internet. Maybe she's part of the informal economy and is struggling with accessing childcare or getting time off to prepare for these important things in her day. Maybe she needs to drive a check over to the different sectors, is that it brings together different faith traditions and belief systems and different people with different experience and different expertise into the public square, where we find common ground and compromise to be able to do the most good. So I'm really grateful to be here today, and thank you, Susana.
And thank you for your beautiful work. And my goodness, what a day you had. I thought you were getting to the end of your day, but then you said, and then I made lunch. Like, oh. So my work has been with youth experiencing homelessness for the past 10 years or so. And some of you may have heard me speak yesterday telling a story about my friend Laura, who became an unexpected partner across difference to really change what it is to be an LGBT homeless youth in Utah. And I was going to talk about that until I heard you, Susana, talk about invisibility and the invisible inequalities, and it made me think about youth experiencing homelessness who are all around us in every community, but often you don't see them because their safety depends on their being invisible. If they are visible in the world, a predator, it's the predators who are looking for them. And then they will be lured into trafficking or assaulted or all manner of terrible things. And that invisibility then means that the wonderful people like my friend Laura who want to help aren't able to help, because how do you find them? How do you know, I'm asked very often, I really want to help youth experiencing homelessness. What do I do? And it's a challenging question because youth experiencing homelessness often don't access services because it's not safe for them. So LGBT youth, it's challenging for them, particularly transgender youth. There was a shelter that said that they were friendly to transgender youth, but then what they would do is lock a transgender youth in a closet overnight for their safety. And that was the best we had at the time. And these aren't stories that you hear about, and it's really hard to address them because it's kind of like this underground information system that, okay, you find this out and then you can start addressing it. So for congregations and people that really want to help, I have found that, like my friend Laura, so a brief story, years ago, I met my very first homeless youth and I was trying very hard to help them and I couldn't. I kept bumping up against different systems. It was illegal to house youth. And my friend Laura was a legislative aide and she was able to open up the system. She had access to power that I didn't have in the legal system and the state government to change the laws to benefit youth. And that example changed my life and my heart because I realized that the people that I had thought were my enemy, like, okay, it's those people out there that are causing these youth to be homeless, but actually it was those people that were the key to the great changes that could happen to benefit the marginalized and those who were suffering and dying. To be honest, there's a rock above the state capitol here called Suicide Rock because that's where youth experiencing homelessness will go. But it's coming together to address inequality in surprising ways that can make all the difference in the world. So my life now is, okay, how can we work together? I'm an LGBT pastor. You know, how strange and unexpected is that? But I see it as God's unusual call on my life to be this kind of human bridge. And so I'm grateful to each of you because I know that, like Sam, your days are filled with helping others, and I'm grateful.
Well, hello, everyone. What a pleasure to be here. My name is José Borjón. Again, I'm the Consul of Mexico here for the state of Utah. And as a consul, my main responsibility is to serve the Mexican nationals who are here residing and tend to their documentation needs and also protection of their human rights. At the same time, I'm a Mexican career diplomat and a member of the Mexican government. So what I would like to offer as an insight and to contribute to this very important conversation is my experience as a practitioner as a diplomat and to take you to focus on migration. Migration as an end result of these inequalities we're discussing, we're having this conversation. I thought it was brilliant how Dr. Susana Mosquera talked about the invisible goal. You know, this invisible goal of inequalities has visible, real, everyday results, as we can see in homelessness, as we can see in the needs of the population that are being served through faith-based organizations. These inequalities have such an impact, and that's what I wanted to share from my perspective of immigration. Why do people come here? Well, obviously there are not a lot of factors for economic reasons, violence in the countries they're coming from, pursuit of family reunification, pressures arising from global warming. So this encompasses regular migration, irregular internal displacement, and how have we, and when I say we, I'm talking about Mexico, but also our neighbor countries in the Central American region, try to approach this. And I think it's important because it's something that is not out there. Ever since 2018, Mexico and the countries of the Northern Triangle, which is Honduras, El Salvador, and Guatemala, got again together. I mean, this has been a process, but I said, let's do something that really changes the structural situations of in our countries, Mexico as well, especially the southern part of our country is very undeveloped, and let's do it in a comprehensive way. Let's do it taking into consideration the Sustainable Development Goals, the Pact on Global Compact for Safe and Orderly Regular Migration of the United Nations. And that's when they commissioned a UN organization, the Economic Commission for Latin America and the Caribbean, to put together a strategy, to put together a plan, but a plan that should be comprehensive, a plan that needs to be really taking into account all these goals that we're talking about, so that we can really go deep into those structural reasons that push people out of their countries. And that's why a conversation on inequalities is so relevant as the other goals, but really goes to the bottom of where we are today, and that sometimes we forget that it's a real reason why people migrate. So I will leave it here with the purpose of returning and going a little bit deeper on this strategy, on the impact, what is happening, and at the same time, how do you see it? I mean, what I think is very valuable is that you're here and that we're discussing these subjects from another perspective. Thank you.
Thank you. I don't know, it's working, thanks. Yesterday I heard someone asking in the other panel, I think that it was in the panel on poverty. Some of the persons suggest that poverty is an idea that people could have on their minds. And then you have to change the idea, and then poverty will disappear. If things were so easy to do, we will have already done them. It's not that easy. It's not an idea. Of course, poor people don't want to become and to remain poor for the rest of their lives. But poverty, inequality is structural. It's there in the society, and we have to change. I hear another word that I really like, and then I mention, because it is motivation. I think that it was Elise who said that in another panel yesterday. Motivation is a purpose that you have to have on life, to change, to do something. But sometimes motivation is a very subjective thing. It depends on your family. It depends on the kind of parents you had. It depends on the impact you received to receive education, to be concerned that you have to study because you have to force yourself to have a better life. But it doesn't happen all the time. You have a family, one of the children is very aware that he has to study and the other one not. And they have the same parents, they live in the same house, and they have the same approach to life. So it's a quite tricky thing what we have to do to solve this gap. And I want to make a question. The question for the panel is where are the solutions? It will be technological solutions, it will be a policy approach, it will be an economic approach. Is civil society, those religions, activities, where can we find tools to solve this problem? The first is to realize that we have an equality gap and it is a huge one. And then where we have to look to find those tools to solve this problem. We start with you, Samantha.
Thank you. You know what? What first came to mind when you were talking about poverty and that statement that poverty is an idea, is this this recurring thought I have that it's not possible to create an unbeatable game. So I think sometimes in public policy or tax code or whatever it is that we try to do through government, we try to create an unbeatable game that might distribute resources more equitably, whether that is financial, whether it's access to education, access to technology. And those are all critical paths that need to happen. But what stands out to me is the requirement each of us has to need less, to make a choice to need less power, to make a choice to need fewer resources, because there is no way to force people to make good choices on behalf of their neighbor. And so coming at it from the perspective, maybe with my background in like messaging and in education and in the work that I try to do to inspire people to move from good intention to action, for me, I think there's just this missing part, this missing messaging part that's around personal agency and personal choice, that for somebody else to have more, it might mean that you need to be willing to have a little bit less, to share more of your power, to share more of your influence, to share more of your access.
That's similar to what I've been doing lately, and so I appreciate you bringing that up. About a year ago, I was contacted by a young woman in Kenya who was experiencing extreme poverty, and she was able to access the internet and reach out to me. And she's a lesbian Christian, and in her community, she was unable to get employment because she was shunned. So she was looking to me to see what I could do, and I couldn't think of anything that I could do across the world. So I asked her what ideas she had, and she said, "Well, if I had a little bit of money, I could start a fruit stand, and that could support me." And she was caring for her mother who has Alzheimer's. I could do that. So I said, "Perfect, let's do that. I can send you a little bit of money and you can start a business." So from this one individual, she then started gathering people around her. She's this person of incredible faith. So she started a Bible study, which turned into a little church. And now there are 36 people that come together every week. But then they started business classes. And then they started writing grants to me so that they could start little micro businesses. And now there are several businesses that they have. And then they started youth groups, and the youth just opened a car wash. And so it's beautiful what has happened there, but what I'm thinking about is there are so many people that have resources that want to help. And there are folks that need just a little bit so they can achieve their dream. So what I'm working on recently is how can I match up people with resources with people that need a little bit of resource. But it's also the policy is part of it, the law is part of it. It's, as you said before, it's not a simple solution because in Kenya it's illegal to be LGBT. So there's that consideration as well, access to medical care. So it's so very complicated, and I think that's why, as evidenced in this panel, all the different disciplines coming together, then we have more pieces of the puzzle for solutions.
Well, this is really a wonderful question, and it gives me the opportunity to return to what I was saying. How do we tackle poverty in the region of Latin America and the Caribbean? First, by understanding how economic development models have worked in the past and have failed in current circumstances, and how, again, this idea that the countries in Mexico and Central America are guided by the UN, by the Economic Commission of Latin America, trying to put together a comprehensive development plan that has its focus in equality. It's really important because our economic policies may have been very successful in overall GDPs and certain indicators, but when you deep go into seeing those numbers in our societies, you still see that inequality, that gap as relevant as always. Your example was very, I think, important because I was also thinking in my countries in Latin America how in many occasions our communities are naturally entrepreneurs. They're naturally looking to find ways out of the cycle of poverty, but sometimes the structural rules, regulations in each country, corruption, make that impossible. And that's where we need to have those conversations. We need to go deep into seeing what is wrong in the structures legally in each country, transparency, democracy, rule of law, that really are roadblocks to an everyday person to have another way of life. And I think that's important, and that's where, you know, everyone should be involved, academia. That's why it's important, this discussion, faith-based civil society, because it's, I think, the only way that we can approach the issue of inequality and break the circle of poverty. And those are the objectives of the sustainable development, and planning and developing of initiatives should have that focus. I think that's the main outcome that we want to transmit, both at a regional, personal, and state level, that we really need to think different everything so that we have a more equal, just society.
Thank you. I really appreciate all the comments. And I think that we have to give the floor to the audience because that will improve the debate. Please take the microphone that is over there and place your question.
Hello, my name is Samuel Kalule. I'm from Africa, but I live here. I think we are not doing enough. And talking, we've had so many sessions, conferences talking about all those things, but the reality is we are not achieving and will never achieve unless we change strategies. Many UN governments donate money to the government to improve lives of people, but that money will never go to the people intended. Many scholarships even are being given, but the politicians, the people who have, will be the one giving those scholarships to their children. So I think we need to change a strategy and do some research completely, go to the ground. And I'm glad Reverend, or I don't know, she mentioned that we need to go down and see what is there and see how can we assist these people, not in the big, using big thing, because I know policies and red tape and other things, it will not work. We need action. We need people to go on the ground and see what is there and see how can we assist these people. I think that's how we can be able to address some of those inequalities. For me, that's what I see. But we'll be here talking and say, okay, let's increase more support, but that support will not reach the people. And we'll come again and discuss and discuss. Let's try to find, not only politicians and people with power, even students. What can I do to improve a life of someone who is in this challenge? And you have $1, you have $2, you have $10, which can even take someone to the school. Thank you so much.
Thank you. That wasn't a question, or as far as I can see. So please.
Hi, my name is Susana. I'm from Belgium, but I go to school at Lehigh University in Pennsylvania. I also represent the World Cohesion Organization at the UN as a youth representative. First of all, thank you for today's session. I was actually the one yesterday who asked the question about poverty, because I was kind of surprised how the main rhetoric during the session was that it was a mindset, because as you mentioned, and I'm happy it's finally being mentioned at a conference like this, it's about structural issues, and we need structural solutions. I really liked your point about Ms. Burt, okay. I liked your remarks about personal agency, and I think that's really important. I think as a society and overconsumption, that's definitely an issue we have to address. But it also reminded me of a point that was made yesterday in the session on poverty. I'm going to try and paraphrase it. I hope it's as close as how they said it yesterday. But it was basically about the fact that poverty is somewhat relative. If you're in poverty, there's probably someone that's worse off than you, so you just need to lower your standards and be happy with where you are. I don't think that's necessarily what you meant. I agree with the personal agency thing, but if you look back at the structural issues and the structural solutions, if you look at how much the wealth that the richest 1% has, that inequality in like socioeconomic status, and how other identities like race, sexuality, gender identity play a role in that. I think personal agency is one part of it, but another part is that we need to dismantle those systems, and we need to dismantle those large-scale inequalities. And I was wondering where your perspective was on that, because who does that personal agency belong to? Is it people that are in poverty that need to want less, or is it those that are in power and those that? Sure.
No, I love your question and the opportunity to clarify. So when I talk about this that we need to want less, or this responsibility that we have to need less, I'm talking about those who have. So I'm talking about the need for me personally to be willing to share some of my power, and that might mean that someone near me who is maybe in a less equitable situation has greater influence and greater power. I love also, I can't remember your name, was it Samuel? Samuel, yeah. I loved what you had talked about too, and I think these are related. You know, there are two prongs to what needs to happen. There are these large global initiatives. So for our organization, you know, we'll have these large donations perhaps to the World Food Program or to UNICEF, and those things are definitely needed and an important way to support improvements globally. But from a faith-based perspective and from a community action perspective, a lot of the gains come from empowering local groups and local communities to own the solutions to their own problems. And so the more that we can do perhaps to provide that support, a lot of times when we look, and I love some of the examples you shared from Kenya, there is someone who has a plan, who knows what needs to happen, who has the knowledge, who has the connections, and what they need is a bit of resource, right? And so connecting people to those resources for them to be able to use their agency to act in a way that they understand to benefit their community. I think if we're talking about changes in strategy, that's where there is a lot of potential that's untapped, is in respecting the wisdom and the knowledge of individuals to resolve the problems that are within their own communities and being willing to provide the resources for them to act on that.
Hi, my name is Mohan Sudbutula. Thank you all so much for being here, by the way, and sharing your time. I'm local to Salt Lake City. I run a healthcare nonprofit actually based out of Salt Lake City that focuses on increasing access to medical resources for minorities. And so this is something that is very near and dear to me. And I'm a bit of a cynic when it comes to reducing inequalities. There's a quote that I personally hate because I believe it's true. And it's just been empirically the case throughout history. But the quote is, the quickest way to build a society or a community is to exclude someone. As long as there's a lowest common denominator, there's always going to be something to build off of. And so when we're looking at something as lofty as reducing inequalities, there's a lot of multifaceted aspects that we can approach with this, whether it be structural inequality, economic inequality, inequality in healthcare access. And depending on where you are, I suppose, certain needs precede those of others. And what I'm wondering is, is there a way to try and address massive boards of inequality unilaterally across the way without prioritizing certain issues over another? Because more often than not, in doing so, we cannibalize on the initiatives of other developments in addressing inequalities, or we don't prioritize correctly. So I'm wondering, how can we compartmentalize maybe a little better in context of issues, and how can we empower our communities to start working towards those solutions in a way that makes sense and is measurable?
This is a very difficult question.
Yeah.
I'm sure we cannot give an answer now immediately, but measurement. This is a really important thing because all the SDGs had targets and had indicators. And we are, I think, from the time on, we have been walking with our eyes closed. We need to know what people in the local level really need. And they have to do their research. They have to make they have to create the knowledge about the real problem. Those indicators cannot be from the World Bank. I'm so sorry, I read many stuff from the World Bank, and they have very, very technical, interesting approach. But when you have to fit those approaches in the real local problem, it doesn't work, because the problem they have to face is a different one, and they have to use the tools they had. So those are indicators we have to create, and I'm really proud that this is an academic conference, because here we are with the students and with the scholars, and the main thing we have to focus on is that students, you have a real role for the future involvement of these SDGs. Without you, that will arrive to nowhere. Not because it will be for your generation to develop the SDGs, it's that you are the ones that have to make the research, they have to create the indicators that we can use to know which one, because inequalities are all around. So which one do we start with? With food insecurity, I was amazed that now when I was coming to Utah University, the McDonald's, and I'm so sorry, but the McDonald's was full of cars attending to get food. hamburgers at 10 o'clock in the morning, it's not healthy. I'm quite sure about that, and I'm not in the health business. But this is a problem, and it has many levels and have to be approached, but we need data. We need thousands and thousands of data, and data must come from local approach, not from the World Bank. World Bank will have to help us. And it's amazing that World Bank is involved in the creating of the SDGs, because he knows that, well, we have to finance all the SDGs. But where we start, that answer have to come from local level. I don't know, you can continue.
I would be interested in sharing, as I listened to your questions and the gentleman before, I think the value of our meeting, of this academic conference, is that we are able, or we should be able, to feel stimulated to think and see things different and act different. This is not, I mean, obviously the name academic can put people off and say, oh, I'll do my report. This, at least as we prepared ourselves for this conversation, this can really and should, and the questions show, put us to think things different. And that's, the beauty of the title of Why It Matters. Why it matters, because if we don't think comprehensively, not compartmentalized, but comprehensively, like saying, this policy it should take into effect and consideration these goals, these tasks. Are we doing it? Then we're doing the same problem as always. And the call of the first gentleman of how can we do this action? Well, it's just making small changes, as we can see in different examples, but at the same time preparing ourselves to work and think differently into more global. And believe me, on the issue of migration, people vote with their feet. And literally, if they don't find equality in their countries, even if they love and they've been there for generations, they will look for more opportunities. But then the answer in the receiving countries is not enforcement, build a wall. If you are not sensible and understanding what are the reasons that people are coming to these countries, those are everyday situations. Those are very practical things. We were discussing homelessness, and I was reading today's Salt Lake Tribune. There's a proposal like, hey, get service or go to jail. If we don't understand how everything is being connected, how then we get those kind of limited solutions which are not, and that's why this conversation is important, because we are really talking about very global objectives, but they have an everyday effect on us, and you know it in your clinic and those who are students, and so that's why it's the beauty of this conversation is that we may go over and share ideas, but bottom line, we just need to do things different. That's the call from a global organization, and UN, which encompasses all the countries that we are part of. That's something for the thought.
Oh, thank you so much. I have one quick follow-up regarding the NGO perspective on this one. So, as a personal dilemma of my own, one of the things that I feel NGOs and nonprofits in the United States deal with is this sense of responsibility and duty to be able to intervene and help those where and when we can, and meeting them where they are. More often than not, especially when working with especially disenfranchised communities that are generations away from being in conversations like this, there more often than not is a concern of setting up a vacuum of dependency based off services rendered given to the community. So I'm wondering where then there's a small line between assistance and empowerment, and it is a very fine line to constantly toe. So through your collective experiences and what you have seen, I would love to know what that balance looks like, and how we can better toe that line as we try and reach these goals.
Thank you. You know, I think, when I think about equality, and there are probably a lot of different definitions, but the one that's come to mind is, as I've been listening to these questions, is equality might mean that people have the equal ability and opportunity to exercise their agency. You know I keep coming back to agency, but I think it's so important to respect people's innate wisdom and knowledge for what they want and need in their life. And so you're right, there is this, sometimes it feels like this unnatural tension between the charge to feed the hungry and then not create dependency. And I think that the best approaches are ones that meet the immediate suffering, right, without question, to meet the immediate suffering. And then as you're working with this person as an individual, knowing that they're a whole person, asking those questions. What do you want your future to look like? What solutions would help you? What is your barrier to remaining healthy? Is there maybe a dependency that you're working through? Is there a chronic illness that you need help to manage? And I think that rather than treating people as though they're things and saying, here's the service, now go leave me alone, it takes a lot of energy to dedicate to seeing them as a whole person and to asking them, what do you want for your future? And then how can I help connect you to that in a way that increases your opportunity to make choices for yourself?
Thank you.
So directly along with that, I'm not going to introduce myself to save time. Directly along with that, I'm trying to affect change in just a small community. And I want those individual voices. I want their specific needs to be heard by our local government officials. I have the time and resources to go and be advocating at city council meetings and different things. They're busy trying to make ends meet, like trying to live life. They have so many other challenges that I'm not facing. My question is, how can I bring the broadest coalition of people into a conversation that they may not even have time or means to participate in? How can I make it accessible for everyone so that their voices can be heard and it's not just white male perspective, on what's going on? And I'm going to sit down and take notes as you talk. So.
Well, this is a very good approach if you're taking notes just to remember the ideas. I don't know if maybe Marian, you want to answer this one?
Well, I love this question, and kudos you. I mean, this is so important, and this is something I think about all the time, because it's one thing for me to go and talk, but it's much more important for other perspectives to be heard, and how do they get that access? So a couple things that I have been part of that I've appreciated and learned from and intend to continue. One is, I was part of bringing delegations from all 50 states to Washington, D.C. to speak with elected representatives. And that was transformative for the elected representatives, but also for the delegates. Now, to be able to do that, that's beyond the capability of my NGO, but there were people invested enough to provide the funding for that to happen. So that type of model, I believe, can be done locally at little expense. So if you can find folks who have time and create appointments with elected officials or people in power that will impact them, that is helpful. Another thing to do is to think about when I was running the youth center, the youth would come together and have a meal. So there'd be 75 youth having a meal, and that's when I would invite elected officials or people that run agencies and say, okay, come and talk about what you do and can do for folks for 10 minutes, and then they will ask you questions, and they did. So perhaps bring the folks that you want to have access to the people and say, please come. I want you to meet these people, and they want to meet you. You can do it. The fact that you are thinking about this means that you're going to do it, and I'm curious to hear your solutions as you do this. Kudos you.
I will give you two words. The first one is mentoring. Mentoring. You have to create a mentoring system. You will have some of your colleagues, your students that have the same approach as you. They have to be your mentors. You have to use them as tools to approach, to get to many other more students. And the second one is that sometimes you will discover that results will arrive with a few time. You have to be patient. Patient is a word that, well, I really don't like to use frequently because I want the results to be immediate. But sometimes that don't happen. Sometimes it's difficult that when you do something that, well, the next month you see that everybody understood you and that everything is perfect. It's not working in this way. You have to wait. Baldomero has been waiting 2 years to have this great conference and then you see the result. Sometimes you have to wait a little bit, but if you are doing the approach in a good way, I think that the results will be succeed. Thanks.
Good morning. My name is Lucas Parrish. I'm a senior at the University of Missouri, and we've talked quite a bit about how we can implement different strategies to reduce inequality, but in order to do that on like a larger scale, it requires some level of revenue. I gave a presentation on curbing wealth inequality a couple days ago, and I talked quite a bit about the income tax in the United States. Now and I looked at numbers from like 1981, 2018. In 1981, the top 1% was supposed to pay 33.1% in income tax. They actually paid 33.6% in income tax, so a bit more. In 2018, they were supposed to pay 30.6% in income tax, but only paid 26%. So quite a bit less from what they were supposed to pay. And so, you know, the way that our system is currently structured is really on the backs of the middle class and not as much properly taxing all the way, you know, from bottom to top as it should. So my question kind of is along those lines of how do we set up a tax structure or what kinds of tax structures or ways can we improve the tax structure that we have in order to make sure that we're pulling in the proper amount of revenues from everybody and it's not just coming mainly from the people in the middle and the people at the top are kind of skating on and just growing that wealth and the people at the bottom obviously suffer the most from that.
Well, this is a real complicated question to be answered because none of us are expert on the tax law. And this is the most difficult field in law. But I recommend you to read the book. It's Michael Sandel's latest book on meritocratic problem. And he explains how when you have a so unequal society as we have, not only in the United States, it's a problem all around the world. Those problems with taxes, you find them in Peru and you find them in Spain and in Belgium. Absolutely sure. So the impact is in the concept of common good. If you have not a real concept that we can share about a common good, we live all in the same society. The problem is that you have a group of individuals in the society that create an hubris feeling about themselves. Because they made themselves, they are so meritocratic, but they don't realize that the way they arrive to this top level in society is because they were helped by others. They never realize it. And then you have the other side of society. They are so frustrated because they receive almost nothing. And it has many, many consequences on social, economic, educative level. So I only can do that. I will suggest you to read Michael Sandel because he is a top scholar from the Harvard University. That's the point of view of philosophy on politics, and that could help. Because sometimes difficult fields as tax law are very, very practical, but behind them you have to have a good idea, a very good purpose to focus. If you want to reform a tax system, what do you want to do with the reform? For good or for bad? Then you need a very important concept of good. So Michael Sandel is your guy. So,
Hi, I'm Mariana Bitterman. I'm a researcher in the field of political science and political philosophy. And Mrs. Burt, is it right?
Butterworth?
Oh, I'm
You're
sorry.
good. Just like the pancake syrup in America.
Okay. I really like the points you raised, especially in regards to first the compartmentalization of inequalities, of recognizing the agencies of the people affected and of those in power having to give up this power. But we've talked a lot about people, but if we look at the global playing field, we also have these inequalities on a more global level, on an institutionalized level, especially when we, for example, look at the vaccine debate during COVID. And Rawls was mentioned in the beginning, and he also had a vision for international justice where all nation states were equal players on the playing field, but he called it his ideal theory and recognized, okay, there will always be countries who won't accept our liberal order, for example. So how do we tackle these global structural inequalities, for example, concerning the North-South divide, while at the same time recognizing that there are countries that are undemocratic or where the governments are corrupt?
Obviously, that's a very pertinent and relevant question. I would say, let's see what is being done at a regional level. And obviously, at a global level, we have these compacts that international organizations, these objectives and goals that have been put. But what is happening at a regional level, and that's where I think it's important to see the examples and experiments so far, what are the rate of success? And that would be certain programs of regional integration, which should not only be economic, but also have certain primers on rule of law, democracy, respect, and see how successful they are. And I think the question, the result is out there if we see it at a regional level in the world, certain models of economic integration that have a political commitment to rule of law, democracy are much more developed and successful than others. That would be a first approach to this question.
if I can, I include something. You have to keep on doing research. You have to prove that a system where rule of law is well implemented, because there is a huge difference between rule of law and rule by law. All countries are ruled by law. But if law is unequal, if law is unfair, if you have a great level of corruption, that law doesn't exist for fairness. It exists for injustice. So you need a rule of law, a real one. And when it doesn't work, when it's not correct, you have to realize of that. And you have to do research, and you have to make public those opinions based on facts, on data. So this is what I can suggest, and this is great that you are doing research on political field, because this is a very important one nowadays. And I remember that 2 days ago, I hear that hope is the opposite of despair, and we have to keep on going in this way. Maybe hope is sometimes a bit complicated to materialize, but this is the only way, I think. And I think we have to take the last question. Thank you.
No problem. Hello, my name is Mariah Hamaker, and I'm a senior here at UVU. I am a member of the LGBT community, and I'm also a former member of the LDS Church. When I was able to come out, my parents were I was very lucky. My parents prioritized the relationship with me over the relationship with the church, and I want you to know I'm asking this in good faith, but what processes, because we know that the LDS Church is a significant portion of the reason for the LGBT youth homelessness issue here in Utah. And I'm wondering what is being done by the LDS Church right now to kind of address that issue, and if there are communications between the church and organizations like yours to kind of address this and bridge this gap. This is very personal to me, and I want you to know that I'm asking this not to I'm just curious.
I'm glad you asked that, because what I found when I first came here and I was so distressed by the problem of youth homelessness, there were 5,000 youth experiencing homelessness when I first started. I thought, okay, I know what the problem is, and the problem is religious and this and that and the other thing. And I think that is, it's a myth in society that can be convenient, because if we can blame someone, then okay, we can put our energy into that. And I'm not saying you're doing that. I'm just saying it's out there. Yeah, it's simplistic. And I had a very simplistic approach to it. But what I found was that my main partner in preventing and addressing youth homelessness was and remains the church, which cares very, very deeply about all people, including LGBT people, including LGBT homeless youth, and preventing suicide. So I can say from my experience, this is what I do and have done for many years now, that there are a lot of wonderful people who have done a lot of wonderful things to address this problem, and there is a sea change in Utah around youth homelessness. And the parents that I talk with now, they're not saying, oh, I kicked my kid out. The parents are saying, how can I better support, like the experience you've had? That's what it's like now. How can I support my child? So there is a difference here, and it's because of people all working together. And kudos for you and your journey and being a senior. Congratulations to you. And I'm grateful to your family for loving and supporting you.
Thank you, Reverend, for that. And I wanted to lead with that too, as a mother myself, so grateful you had that experience with your parents and that you were embraced by that love. I think as we consider the role of faith communities, sometimes we can focus only on maybe the messages we feel that they're sharing from a theological point of view. And in my role, like I had said, in developing communication and developing training and developing information, it's very important to me in my role from within a church organization to also provide the practical information. And I think that's really what our communities are craving, right? We have some of these misunderstandings about the role of theology and how we treat one another and we treat our children and we treat our family relationships, where maybe for a parent, life has turned out different than they thought. And it's so important for us to provide information, to understand that our parents are also whole people, our neighbors are also whole people, and that they don't always have the right answers and don't have the right answer first, and that part of the opportunity we have is to help them to process this information and to find the resources they need, maybe to imagine a new path, right, and to imagine a new future for what that will look like. And, like I said, that's been so important to me personally in my career, is to not just have my content tell you how I think you should feel about your problems, which I think sometimes is the weakness that can be out there. Oh, don't worry about it. Here, we're going to tell you how to feel about it. But really to provide resources that help people move through these experiences that become beautiful experiences in their life. And they need help to know, how do I get from where I thought I was going to now this beautiful journey I'm on that I never imagined?
Thank you. It was a great panel to be moderating here today. And thank you to all the students or the persons that made questions. And I just want to finish with the idea why it matters to keep on talking and doing research and speaking about the SDGs. Well, it's because the main idea on the SDGs is that we should not leave no one behind, and no one is everyone. So it's a big task we have to face on, but with goodwill, I think that we are going to do it. So thank you to everybody.